Hi there. Today we're going to take an in-depth look at policies Stephen Harper has outlined in his 2011 platform that directly affect unemployment. So, we're going to start with HCSB, which is short for Hiring Credit for Small Businesses. This addresses cyclical unemployment by decreasing the amount smaller firms must contribute to EI. Employment insurance, or EI for short, provides temporary financial assistance to unemployed Canadians who have lost their job while they look for work or upgrade their skills. This is a measure that supports economic equity, where even if you find yourself unemployed, you won't go hungry or have to live on the street right away. Now, listing the recession as a cause, Harper has lowered the amount of EI premiums firms have to pay with the intent that they can reinvest the money into their own businesses, or ideally, by hiring more workers. Firms will also receive a credit for the difference in EI they pay between this year and the year before. So if they're paying more in EI, it means they're also paying more wages, which the government wants to incentivize. Now, this sounds good in theory, but if we take a closer look, we can see that this doesn't work as well as it sounds on paper. With the lowered premiums, firms save 28 cents every $100 in EI premiums, and the maximum credit is $1,000. Now, if we do the math, we see that firms save $42 per employee per year, which means now you can pay your employees to work for 4 more hours a year, which is better than nothing. In addition to lowering premiums, if you paid $3,000 in EI this year and $2,300 the year before, you'd receive a credit of $700, and that this would allow businesses to reinvest $225 million into the economy, according to the CRA. Now, to achieve the estimated $225 million in savings, firms would have to reinvest around $400 in savings on EI premiums. So firms would have to pay an additional $25,000 in EI insurable wages. To receive the maximum credit amount, firms would have to pay out an additional $62,500 in wages, and call me a pessimist, but I don't think an incentive of $1,000 would get anyone to spend an additional $63,000. In spite of this, the projected cost of this credit is going to be $165 million of taxpayers' money over 2 years, according to the 2011 Conservative platform. Makes you wonder what they're doing with all that money. Now, EI payments don't count towards GDP calculations. Only the consumption of that income is counted in the C part of the equation to avoid double counting. So by lowering the amount of EI firms are paying, the money that would have gone to unemployed people through EI is now going to firms to invest, or to people in the form of higher wages to consume. But how much of an impact is $42 per employee per year going to change people's spending habits? If we take the minimum wage in Ontario right now, which is around $11, and assume a 40-hour work week for a year, an increase to wages of $42 is a 0.2% increase. Now, the next policy we're going to look at is called work sharing. I don't know why it's called that, but it sure sounds nicer than being paid a lot less while still being able to say you have a job. Now, work sharing is an agreement between the employer, the employee, and the government. Now, the employer can reduce your working hours by 10 to 60%, but in exchange, the employee receives income support for the government. So the employer still has to pay people to do less work, but the government pays people tax money to do less work, and people aren't working for half the time, so everyone loses. But hey, at least less people are unemployed. So, even if the output tumbles, people will technically still be employed, which makes Canada's unemployment numbers look rather pretty. However, what this does is stop people from panicking due to a spike in unemployment, which would lower consumer confidence. Work sharing seems like a band-aid solution in this light, but at least we've stopped the bleeding. So maybe it's not as silly as it sounds after all. In fact, when you look at it like that, it's not a bad idea at all. Chalk one up for Harper. So next up we have the Targeted Initiative for Older Workers, which addresses structural unemployment by providing training to older workers, so they have the necessary skills they need to meet today's labor demands. This program has cost us taxpayers $75 million over 3 years, which has provided 32,000 workers with quote-unquote programming. No word on how many actual jobs $2,000 worth of training per person has actually created, which means it would be zero because this policy focuses on helping people get jobs that already exist rather than creating new jobs. Of course, both are important because what's the point of having more jobs if people can't do them? But what I don't understand is why so much is being invested into older workers. Generally, people want to retire by the age of 65 anyways, and older workers tend to be less productive than the younger, so instead of helping out the older workers, why doesn't Harper just focus on reducing unemployment for younger workers? This would make a lot more sense because the unemployment rate for 15 to 24-year-olds is about 3 times as high than workers 65 and over, and more than twice as high as workers from the age of 55 to 64. Now, granted, Harper has policies to help out younger workers as well, as we will shortly see. But if younger workers find jobs, the government will have more tax money to support older workers. For example, the baby boomers, who seem to be doing a lot better than us millennials at this moment. Now, moving on to the Canada Students Grants Program. So this is a program that provides $250 a month to low-income families for every month of undergraduate studies. A student studying 8 months a year would receive $2,000 a year. This program addresses structural unemployment as firms are looking for workers with higher education that have the skills necessary to be competitive in today's globalized economy. In addition, scholarship and bursary money is tax-free, and at that income bracket you'd have to be in to qualify for grants. That would be worth around 115% of your income. Now, taking some overlap into account, the total savings would amount to about 20% of a student's income, assuming minimum wage. If you have income much higher than minimum wage, then you wouldn't be an eligible low-income family anyways. Now, another well-thought-out policy is the Canada Summer Jobs Program, which reimburses nonprofit organizations 100% of minimum wage for giving students 15 to 30 opportunities to acquire meaningful work experience, which again provides skills and experience to the younger members of the labor force. I couldn't find an exact total amount spent on this program, so I pretty much took an 150-page PDF list, averaged the cost for the first page, and extrapolated the data. We can see that the government has reimbursed on average anywhere from around 690 to 920 hours of work per firm. Now, let's move on to Stephen Harper's Supporting Aboriginal Entrepreneurship and Skills Development Program. Now, what this involves is by improving infrastructure for housing, schools, drinking, wastewater, health, police services, for skills training, land development, education, and the promotion of development of clean energy technologies, which ultimately raises sustainability. This is expected to cost $95 million by the year 2016. In addition, $100 million over the next 3 years for First Nations education is to provide early literacy programming and other supports and services to First Nations schools and students, and to strengthen their relationship with provincial school systems. $175 million over 3 years is going to be used to build and renovate schools on reserves. And finally, $300 million annually is going to be used to support post-secondary education for these individuals. Now, the Aboriginal unemployment rate is similar to those youth rates we talked about earlier in that they're more than twice the national average. While helping Aboriginal people develop skills and receive education is a reasonable plan, Harper does not have a single policy in the 2011 platform directed towards recent immigrants and lone parents, in contrast to the 7 full pages of policy outlines that are meant to support families through tax cuts and credits. Unfortunately, lone parents may not be under the best financial circumstances to enroll their children in arts or sports programs, which makes any tax credit virtually obsolete for them. The type of unemployment addressed here is structural as well, as it is difficult for lone parents and recent immigrants to receive the proper education and skills training demanded by employers due to economic or social factors such as language. In order to combat unemployment on all fronts, I would say it is definitely a good idea to devote more time and resources to Aboriginal people as well as recent immigrants and lone parents. Now, hopefully this gave you a little more insight into the policies used to address unemployment. To recap, by 2016, hiring credit for small businesses is going to cost the government $165 million. Protecting jobs and supporting workers is going to cost $321 million. And supporting Aboriginal entrepreneurship and skills development is going to cost a whopping $370 million. The net total is going to be $856 million, all by 2016. And if you ever find yourself unemployed in the future, well, you can always blame it on that little silly hiring credit for small businesses and old people. Well, that's all our time for now, and thanks for joining us.